Cancel culture is real. Cross Politic is on the front lines of this battle with the goal of creating a Christian television network and platform where we can't be canceled and where content creators will have the freedom to glorify God. Our goal is to create a space for like-minded businesses to thrive on this platform and to reach an audience that will not only buy your products and services, but also support your business when the heat of cancel culture comes your way. We want our platform to help you create an anti-fragile business as we bring together Christians from all over the world to tune in. With millions of downloads a year, access to DirecTV, Xfinity, and social media outlets, we are excited to partner with you. So, if you own a business and believe in this vision, then you need to call me. I'm Garrison Hardy, and I am the Business Development Rep at Cross Politic and the Fight Laugh Feast Network. We are looking for businesses, large or small, that not only have great products and services, but also understand that the cultural battle that is impacting the business climate here and now. I have a background in marketing, and I'd love to help you advertise your business on Cross Politic. Give me a call at 208-792-1290 or email me at garrison@fightlaughfeast.com.
At some point, the Christians let me know that I was embarrassing them, and
Wow.
they were good Christians, and I'm a bad Christian.
Wow.
And that they just wanted things to quietly go away. And I think about did an interview with Fox and Friends and Judge Janine on critical race theory. Well, some of my followers, at least one, said, "I'm tired of the topic." The left doesn't get tired. You haven't won the battle, and so you can't get tired, when you got a whole battle to fight, and so we give up too soon.
I think we've run into more fights within the church than we have with our culture on our show.
That's because the church has been infiltrated, Saul Alinsky style,
Ooh.
and they are pushing, social justice, not the gospel of Jesus Christ. The social justice is that feel-good stuff.
Yeah.
And it was part of an agenda. And
What do you mean, like Saul Alinsky style infiltration in the church?
well, people have gone into organizations, institutions like the church with an agenda. And so it's like, I think her name was Sarah Fluke at Georgetown that set up the Organization for Reproductive Rights. She knew that there was a Catholic university and that they were pro-life, and so why, had this high-profile battle for an organization for reproductive rights? Well, you have an agenda. And when you think about the professional organizations, how they have reclassified, different homosexual behaviors. In fact, they're moving towards mainstreaming or sanitizing pedophilia, where people go into the organizations, they get key positions, they work their way to the top, and they use their power to change things.
I think this might be too controversial for our show.
I don't know. We just got canceled.
I'm kidding.
Thanks, Carol.
You just asked me how they do it.
I know, it's true.
My strategy is I think that conservatives need to follow some of Saul Alinsky's tactics, and like with Saul Alinsky, the part as a good Christian that I can't endorse is deception. But he very much advocated infiltration, manipulation, and deception. And I think in the Bible that there's plenty of examples of people using subterfuge. And I tell young people that you don't have to tell everyone everything you're thinking, that there's a place to be quiet. And people like me are wired to be out there in your face. I was born transparent. I can't hide anything. When I do try to hide my feelings or things, it doesn't go well for me. But for other people, I feel like in the body of Christ that people have to be strategically placed, and conservatives have to be strategically placed. If you feel like you got to raise your hand in class and challenge everything the professor says and out yourself, it's going to limit you. And if you're at a workplace and you don't want the DEI training or whatever's taking place, there are some people who are called to challenge it. But for most people, we all need our jobs. You should go. I tell people go, take copious notes, and keep your materials and then send them to me.
You're my researcher.
Right. Yeah, and so and that's almost like guerrilla warfare, or subterfuge in a way, but we can't, we are in a war.
Yeah.
And so we have to act like we're in a war. And during times of war, normal rules are relaxed. Like when David feigned insanity to save his life.
Yes, ma'am.
I mean, you have to do what you have to do. And so Saul Alinsky, I think that, Christians should get past his dedication to Lucifer and read the book and see what's in there that's valuable.
There's actually our pastor, Doug Wilson, I don't know if you know that name, but he wrote a book called Rules for Reformers.
No, I don't know.
Based off.
But he actually
Saul Alinsky's.
it's self-consciously based off of Saul Alinsky's book, but with a twist, bringing it in line with Scripture. But basically agreeing with your point that there's some really savvy tactics here that Christians need to pick up and use.
I think the waitress just peeked in.
She can just come in. And
you can wave her in when she comes back.
Yeah, when she comes back in, she's welcome to come in. And
I'm ready for some salad.
You're gonna get some salad.
Yeah.
I'm gonna get that pecan pie.
Is it pecan or pecan?
It depends on how you want to say it. There's no right or wrong answer.
But how do you say it?
How do you?
Pecan.
See? Yes.
Where are you from?
So my family's kind of all around. Minneapolis is kind of home for me.
And you?
Idaho is basically where I've been living most of my life.
I was born and raised in Texas, and now I live in Idaho.
How do you say it?
I say pecan pie. So it's real.
Ian tried
y'all grow pecan.
That's right.
Pecan.
They ought to know
I
how to
had a
say it.
pecan tree in my neighbor's
folks from
yard.
the South, though.
Say it wrong.
Pecan. I don't know. Where were you born and raised?
Southwestern Virginia.
Okay.
About 10 miles from Booker D. Washington's birthplace.
Oh. Okay. And so you grew up
Chambersburg, in the shadow of Lynchburg, Virginia.
Yeah. Okay.
We were just there last year.
Okay.
January.
I was kind of telling my kids about 9/11 recently, and I've realized that it's been 20 years since 9/11.
It's hard to believe, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And
this week.
this week, yeah. And I was telling them something that's happened 20 years before some of them got here, and my daughter's 14 now. I'm trying to let her know, like, this is what was going on in the world when you came into the world. And I realized, like, okay, I was born in 81. The civil rights movement was 20 years going on when I was born. And so I came inside the middle of this whole new world.
Wow.
I mean, I was born in 1954, and that was the year of the Brown versus Board.
Yes.
So my position is that I was born into a society with systemic racism, and I watched it collapse.
Yeah.
And what we have today is not systemic racism. We have some individual racism, but it's not systemic.
Yeah.
That's why I was bringing this up, because I want to know, growing up in that era, what's the difference between what was going on then, that collapsed, versus what people think they're experiencing now? That, it's like you said.
I mean, they don't want to give up. We were reaching a point where maybe the Supreme Court would abandon, would say we don't need affirmative action any longer because we've made such progress racially. And I think that people that have a vested interest in keeping grievances open, they didn't want to give it up. And so the way they have redefined racism, they say it's permanent.
Yeah.
And even if whites were to give reparations, they still wouldn't be off the hook because racism is permanent, and white people have a property interest in their skin color, and they have to divest themselves of their whiteness. I'm not sure how they're supposed to do that, but
blackface.
They don't want to give it up. The identity, they allow some people to do what in my day we call ethnic fraud, to pretend that you are a member.
Ethnic what?
Fraud.
Fraud.
Ethnic fraud.
Okay.
When I was in college and as a professor, we knew that there were some students that claimed to be minorities to get the benefit. So it was ethnic fraud. Because we can self-identify.
Elizabeth Warren.
And who was that, Rachel?
Dolezal. She's an hour and a half from us.
She's from Spokane, Washington.
How in the world?
No, but they allowed, the black community allowed, not the black community, the black elites allowed that to take place. And so you can self-identify as anything. You can self-identify as a white man, but then you'd get blasted. Because why would you want to be a white man when there's so many benefits to being a person of, quote, color?
Right.
But if you're a conservative, you don't get those benefits.
Right. If you lose your black card.
There were real grievances.
He lost it moving to Idaho.
There were real grievances that happened in that time, in that era, especially where you were growing up at, right?
Yeah, but I was not raised to blame other people or look for handouts. And I believe that if I worked hard, it would make a difference. And I did, and consequently.
Yeah.
Part of what a lot of people argue, though, with those grievances is that since we haven't, here's an interesting, Black Wall Street, for instance. You look at Black Wall Street and you see all the accumulated wealth from black culture at that time. What happened, it never got to the place where it could be replenished or restored in any way to the people of that generation that came after. So there's grievances there that some people are arguing that we have not been able to get to.
Well, one thing, we hear the story of Black Wall Street, and if the story is accurate, a bigger story is how, in less than 60 years after the end of slavery, without government assistance, that blacks created a part of the city that became the envy, of all the neighbors. And so that's one of the things that took place. And you ask, why was it not rebuilt? There could be a lot of factors influencing why it wasn't rebuilt in that community, but it showed the potential of blacks and their successes, which were taking place all across the country. That is not being discussed because it doesn't fit the narrative.
Yeah.
And the fact that there are schools in New England that never discriminate against black students on the basis of race. They have alumni going back, to the 1800s. And so you never hear about that. These are black people that applied to schools. They were admitted on the merits. They graduated. They're part of black alumni of schools that did not discriminate on the basis of race. And then you have W.E.B. Du Bois. He went to Harvard, in the 1920s. They admitted him. They didn't discriminate against him. And a lot of the discrimination that's taking place today, and it seems like the government is back in the business of systemic racism in some cases, or allowing it. It's against Asians and it's against whites. It's not against blacks.
How is it against Asians and whites? How do you see that?
Well,
remember the Harvard? Are you referring to the Harvard?
It's not just Harvard. It's all the schools are doing to Asians what they used to do to Jewish students because they're high achievers. And so if they admitted people based on merit, the schools would be filled with Asians, then whites would be second, because Asians outperform whites, and then minorities would be at the bottom. And it wouldn't be that you would have a lily white institution. Instead of the forced 8 to 10% black and maybe the 12 or 15% Hispanic, you might have 4 or 5% of those groups that actually meet the standards. And so you would not get the large numbers that people are trying to force. And so I believe that with affirmative action, when it wasn't getting the results, the schools kept lowering the standards, and so they have a lot of young people in elite institutions that can't do the work. They're frustrated, they're angry. There's nothing to do but protest because you're being used.
Oh, that's good. That's good.
Thomas Sowell makes a lot of this argument too, right? He's like a lot of the people that they're trying to get there inside of these institutions would do better at other colleges.
Well, they would, and I think about my own career. That I started at a community college because I'd been a high school dropout. I had to prove myself there to get into the 4-year school. I graduated with honors from the 4-year school. That helped me get into graduate school. I went to Virginia Tech first, then the University of North Carolina. And then after I'd been a professor for 10 years, I went to Yale and got a master's in law. But if I had started at a top university, I would not have been prepared for that. And my personality is such, if I was not doing well academically, I wouldn't do it. I either have to be doing well or I wouldn't do it. I would have dropped out.
How do you think that, so from that era that you're coming up with the civil rights movement, how did that era of prejudice and racism collapse?
I think that the changing of people's hearts and minds. First, you had the civil rights movement, and that was not a black civil rights movement. And if we go back to the true story of America's history, you have to go back to the fact that there were always white abolitionists.
Racism.
How it ended.
Yeah.
I mean, we were making great strides until we elected our first black president.
Oh!
He rediscovered, he brought in the Marxism, aggressive Marxism, the restorative justice that affected the criminal justice system as well as schools. And it affected the educational system because it made it harder for teachers to suspend kids that really did need to be suspended because they were violent.
Can you break down what is that Marxism that you said that Obama brought back, got into the school? Like, what does that look like?
Fine. Well, with President Obama, you realize that he started off as a community organizer, and he taught Saul Alinsky tactics. And Saul Alinsky, was very much a Marxist, and he watched the student protesters in the 1960s when they were protesting the Democratic Convention, and during that time, there was a lot of violence in the 1960s. People were trying to overthrow the system. Most of the social movements, the gay rights movements, the women's movement, the environmental movement, as well as the black civil rights movement, all of that started in the 1960s. We also got no-fault divorce in the 1960s.
Yes, ma'am.
And it was about destroying traditional institutions and the family, attacks on the family, because in 1965, Daniel Patrick Moynihan, who was a professor, but he later he was a professor at Harvard, a senator from New York. He wrote a controversial essay about the black family and the fact that 25% of black households were headed by females, which meant that 75% were not.
Yep.
That was very controversial, and he was roundly attacked and called all sorts of names by saying that this unhealthy, dysfunctional pattern was developing in the black community. The left, the progressives, immediately attacked him and the whole idea that two-parent families were preferable to other family structures. They said there was a European family structure. And they also came up with this argument that to criticize behaviors of people, whether it was violence or how they were living their lives, choices that they were making, that you were blaming the victim. And so you really couldn't address that. So that's some of the things that took place in the 1960s. But Saul Alinsky watched the protesters and pretty much told them they were going about it all wrong. And that if they wanted to make change, they had to, basically clean themselves up. And so with the infiltration, people went into academia, or they went into, institutions like the churches or the government, so that they could change them within. And so infiltration, deception, and manipulation, how I believe it worked is you got people in the universities and various places, they did not have a lot of power. They were at the bottom, they were the radical, but over time, they worked their way through the system. As they got into positions of power, they could hire others like themselves, people that thought the way they did. And now many of the university presidents and people like that, they're the radicals of the 1960s.
Yeah.
They are running the show now.
Yeah.
And they have radicalized the students. So when you have student protesters and black students or various students demanding things from institutions, you can be sure that there is a faculty member or a group of faculty members that are feeding the students what to ask for. Mm-hmm. And that's what it's all about. And the radical methods of taking over the college presidents' offices or taking over parts of the institution, holding people captive until you get what you want, that happened in the 1970s, and that's how a lot of schools got their Black Studies programs.
So
and then they got and while I was at Princeton, the Asian students did a sit-in at the president's office, and they got an Asian studies program, And Asians are supposed to be, the model minority and well-behaved and all of this.
Assimilate easily.
Yeah. Right, yeah, but they did a protest.
That's funny.
But getting back to Obama, he's clearly trained in Marxism, and he surrounded himself with people that, that they thought Mao and some of the people that we would consider communist terrorists and bad people from history, that these were great guys. Mm-hmm. And the political correctness, like in the 1990s, we were debating about speech codes and which schools could have speech codes. And generally, it was believed that it was a violation of the First Amendment, and they usually when they were challenged, they failed. Mm-hmm. But with political correctness, the trigger warnings, the safe spaces, and all of those things, private institutions realize that as a private institution, they have their own constitutional rights, and that they have their own ability to decide, what kind of student that they're going to produce. And so when they impose political correctness and set up the safe spaces and cater to whatever whim a particular identity group wanted, they were able to do that because they call themselves independent private institutions. But the problem with that is that they take federal money.
That's right.
And like
Title IX.
Many of them get over $500 million a year in federal money, and they get state money, millions of dollars of state money, and I think they should be considered state actors because of that. And we tried to pursue that when there was a controversy at Vanderbilt over the Christian student groups, and that resulted in about half of the student groups losing their recognition as campus organizations, which meant they could not use the email system, they could not recruit
classroom access.
Yeah, they had lots of restrictions placed on them. We tried to pass a state law in Tennessee that would have argued that they were state actors because they were getting these millions of dollars. Mm-hmm. The Christian schools, the independent Christian schools, opposed it, and
because they were taking state money.
They're taking state money. They're taking.
Is that why they oppose it?
I think that they wanted to be able to discriminate or themselves, or for whatever reason, they did not want the oversight. So when they should have stood with us and defended the Christian groups, they did not.
My inclination would be they were taking state money and they didn't want.
Right. They wanted to still be able to. They wanted to be able to discriminate against non-Christian groups.
Yeah.
And that's.
But they didn't do that. What they did was they have allowed the political left to remake their campuses. So at a Belmont University, a Lipscomb University, those that were traditionally, even Tribeca has some problems, that were traditionally Christian, they have allowed themselves to be liberalized to the point that if you are an Orthodox Christian, you're very uncomfortable on those campuses. And they have professors that are very anti-Bible.
Sure.
But the hook for college Christian universities
Thank you so much.
has always been Title IX and federal funding.
Yeah.
That's what's been the hook in getting Christian universities to basically dilute their faith to keep the federal government from regulating them further.
Speaking of Marx, though, I mean, one of Marx's tenets
right,
is for government to run education.
Well, I know, and you think about the public school system, how they are total indoctrination meals today. Well, that's been happening for a long time. And
yes, ma'am.
There was a time in our history when teachers' unions actually cared about students and they were focused on education. Well, that was a bygone era.
Was that happening in your era? Was that still?
Well, I mean, I was not a public school teacher, so I didn't deal with teachers' unions, but I have a friend, her name is Mary Poplin, and she teaches at Claremont University Graduate School. She teaches, people that are going to be teachers. So she was part of the conferences that the National Educational Association would put on, and she watched the changes take place. And the students now that have become teachers have very much been steeped in critical theory. And it's not just critical race theory. We focus on critical race theory, but it's critical theories that are part of Marxism.
Right.
And includes critical queer theory that's very much focused on heterosexuals and homosexuals and their uneven power relationship. And that's why they're pushing the transgenders. They're using transgenders. And my problem with that is that the scientific research suggests that people, that have gender dysphoria, that they're suffering from a treatable illness. And the very fact that they would encourage little boys and little girls through their curriculum, to identify as something other than their biological sex, that they have teaching materials, some of the LGBT organizations, that tells little boys or little girls that they may not be a little boy or a little girl, they can choose. And so we have an increase of young people that believe that they were born in the wrong body or they're identifying with a different sex, well, that it was planted into their heads.
Right.
And we have parents, situations where people that are not even biological parents are adopting children. There might be two lesbian women, they adopt a little boy, and then the next thing you know, they're saying the little boy identifies as a woman, and they're transitioning that child. And that involves hormones, and it involves things that are very destructive to the child, which seems to me would be a form of child abuse, but it's not treated as such.
Why did I get the smaller piece and he gets the bigger?
That's all right. It's all right.
It's all right.
We'll see how this goes.
Be nice to Sirpa. Be nice.
I think the portions used to be bigger.
I agree.
I've never seen anyone order that before. Now I know what it looks like.
I'm going to give thanks for us real quick.
Yeah.
Father, thank you so much for your kindness to us. And Jesus, thank you for Carol and her work. We pray a blessing on her and our time together in Christ's name. Amen.
Amen. I played junior college basketball in California. And when I was moving to Idaho, all my black teammates were like, "You're moving to northern Idaho? So I can't even come and visit."
Well, because a stereotype.
Huge stereotype. We live in a town, University of Idaho, so we're in a college town, and then 7 miles to the west of us is Washington State University. So it's 2 land grant institutions in a 7-mile radius, surrounded by farm fields. So it's actually a really nice area.
But when you're talking about college professors behind activism, we know that firsthand.
100%.
We've had protests at our events, like our church events and things. It's organized by
college professors
or former professors. So we know exactly what you're talking about.
Give credits that they show up and protest.
That's right.
And you know something, when I was, during the time I was a faculty member, the progressive professors would use the email system to recruit for the campaign.
It has to be interesting, when you say, I've seen now, there's a couple things that are getting worn out. The first one is Marx, the second one is critical race theory. And so what's happening now is that the word Marxism, where in the 80s it would have sent shrills down the spine of
People
Americans.
think it's wonderful. Socialism, great.
Right. But
solve
now,
all of our problems, create a utopia.
It doesn't have the same effect it did 40 years ago at all.
Yep, 100%.
And so as a person who's kind of in this and studying this, how do you get people to see that this is poison? Because I don't think they see
It
that.
has to do with the fact that, universities are no longer...
You better share.
Thank you so much.
You better share.
I'm going to share.
Universities are no longer educating students. And so they are not getting educated, they're getting indoctrinated. So they really don't know history. And then the history that they get tends to be, I'm going to say whitewashed for lack of a better term.
It's okay.
It might be a better term.
Now, with CRT, it's kind of interesting to watch how all of a sudden parents are now finally getting excited, pushing back in the public school system. Why CRT? I'm glad.
Right.
But like, how come CRTs all of a sudden, like, there's been evolution in school for years. They've kicked the Bible out. They've kicked prayer out. They've kicked, they've been doing LGBT curriculum for decades. They've been teaching sex ed all the way down to like third grade. Why all of a sudden CRT is kind of like, all right, now I'm fed up. That's enough.
Well, I can tell you that Fox News has been covering it for months, at least for 6 months. And I've been on, and I strongly urge parents to push back and protect their children. And I was wondering what was wrong with white people. In fact, I gave a talk in the fall, and I said, what's wrong with you all? Because why aren't you defending your children? Why are you allowing them to be bullied and shamed because of the color of their skin? Many parents told me that they were afraid that if they challenged the schools, that that child would be targeted, that child would be harassed. But what happened is that it got so bad that parents started organizing together. And so they did draw the line. And I think what is different about today is that COVID, or whatever the backstory is on COVID, that parents got to overhear some of what was being taught to their children.
Zoom classroom.
And then the children also came home with assignments that made the parents uncomfortable, and then there are teachers that are uncomfortable. So I think that it's a combination of factors that have come together, and it has awakened a sleeping giant, and mamas have become mama bears, and fathers have become papa bears, and a lot of the people that are actually involved in fighting back are immigrants, or they are racial and ethnic minorities because they see the harm to their own children.
That's interesting.
It's interesting that she says immigrants because remember, who was it? Joseph Backholm that we talked to about. He was a guy that was helping organize
political operative in Washington.
In Washington State, just trying to get people out to vote. That's all he was trying to do is just get conservatives out to vote. And he would go visit churches and he would try to get
white evangelical churches.
And he told us the white evangelical churches were all just like, well, we're not really sure. We want to be political and all this kind of thing. And he said, I had the warmest welcomes with a lot of the immigrant churches.
That's right.
And he said, and they would welcome me right in because a lot of them come from Eastern Europe, or China, or whatever, or Cuba, and they've seen it firsthand, and they're like,
that's why they're in America.
Exactly, and they're like, they know exactly what's going on, and they're like, tell us where to go, we'll vote. And that's interesting. That's interesting.
Well, white evangelicals, especially the Southern Baptists, something, my spiritual journey took me to the Southern Baptists, and I didn't know why I was there. I thought I was there because I spoke at a church about my book, Be the People, and I met some people, and I went on a mission trip, and I started attending their events, and eventually, because I was attending their church more than I was attending my church, I joined the Southern Baptist Church. But then maybe 2 or 3 years later, they had this controversy over critical race theory. And so my Christian journey, I could argue that God sent me to Nashville and he sent me to that Baptist church because he knew that the Baptists were going to be torn apart by critical race theory, and they needed someone that understood what was taking place. So that's, we say God is involved with a lot of things that maybe he was, maybe he wasn't. But I think that's why I'm in the Baptist church.
So I was
going to bring this up.
You were there this past time too here in Nashville, right?
I was trying to speak.
I tried to get to a mic, so I was trying to get to you.
I was at the mic.
Were you at the mic?
I was standing at the mic when someone called the question, but they said, we randomly choose. I had been there 2 days. Everyone knew I was there. Everyone knew why I was there.
Yeah.
And they chose not to let me or any of the other minorities that were going to speak against critical race theory. We did not get to speak. And so I was very offended. I had a bee in my bonnet for weeks.
Well, that's the thing. I was trying to figure out there was a documentary that came out in 2019 about what had happened at were you paying attention at all to what happened in 2019?
By what standard documentary?
Well, just what happened.
I knew what happened, that they adopted
that
critical race
CRT
theory
and intersectionality
Resolution
and analytical
9. Yeah.
tools.
Yes,
Yep.
exactly.
And so I've written about it and I've spoken about it and I knew about it, and that was one of the reasons I was recruited to go to the convention. And I had a busy schedule.
Yeah.
I had other places to be. And I changed my schedule to go to the convention thinking that I would get to, so I assume that people are innocent, that these are well-meaning white folks.
Oh.
Nope.
No agenda.
Right.
And that I could explain to them. I mean, that I could just share about what I knew, my knowledge. And I didn't get to speak. And so, I mean...
And it wasn't an accident. I don't think it was an accident.
It was not
at
an
all.
accident. They pretend, oh no, it's just random. And it wasn't an accident that the question was called. I think the whole thing was staged. And I think the Southern Baptists have been taken over from within, Saul Alinsky style. And that, you know, that it's focused on appearances. Like they were so concerned about what the media would say or how they would look.
Yes.
That they chose the easy way out.
When they're so concerned about how it looks, why would they not let you speak, even at least on that level?
Well, they had a black person on the stage, and they was fulfilling the need to show their diversity.
Wow.
And then they had these white, you know, the guy who was, he was the head of the committee or something like that.
Yeah,
he was castigating people, Meredith. I may be getting his name wrong.
Yeah. I know who you're talking about. Merritt.
Yeah, but what...
James Merritt.
James Merritt.
I mean, just how he tried to shame and bully. They allowed one white person to speak. This man, bless his heart. They
I know what that means.
The one person to speak that was white, who was trying to explain it, and he was older. And so then he was like a foil for the guy that could shoot him down. And you're just part of this racist problem, and implied that the man had a problem with race. If they really, and then the question was called before I or any of the other racial ethnic minorities who were standing up there at microphones. We had filled out the paperwork because you had to fill out the paperwork.
Statement.
And all of that was done, and so. They knew exactly what they were doing. It wasn't random.
Right afterwards, I heard you on a few interviews and radio stations and stuff, and you were explaining all this. So you've been fairly vocal about what happened. You not heard from anybody at the SBC saying, sorry about that, or we didn't mean to do that, or.
Say it. Get him.
My pastor called me in. Along with someone who is, I think, maybe on the executive committee that's in our church. Okay. And apparently there were some congregants that were very concerned about what had happened, because they were my Facebook or Twitter followers, so they knew my side of it. And so the head of the elders, who was called in, he wanted to explain to me that it was random and that I was not singled out and that they didn't prevent me from speaking. But I wasn't buying it. And but that happened. And initially, I'm thinking, because I thought I was just meeting with the pastor, oh my, I've been called before the elders. They call you before the elders before they're going to kick you out. Two elders there. But I have a friend who was a lifelong Southern Baptist, white. She told me before the meeting, she said, they will not allow you to speak. They will shut you down. And she said, no, you've not been called before the elders. She said the elders probably didn't even know you were there. She said you had a meeting, with 3 people.
That's it. So what were you going to say?
I don't know what I was going to say. A lot of times I will respond to what other people have said, but I would have pointed out that critical race theory and intersectionality have no place in the church, that biblical justice and social justice are not the same thing, and that the church should be leading the way when it comes to race relations, and that we have plenty of scriptures that we should be modeling love to the rest of the world. So that's part of what I was going to say.
When you were talking about critical theory, that's something that people overlook a lot. And so people, I realize, and this term is changing, so it's kind of hard to wrap my head around. critical race theory now on how people, it's not hard to wrap my head around how people are using it, but hard to wrap my head around the definition. But critical theory itself seems like what we really need to plan our time at and then apply that across the different...
Well, you have to realize that while we're focused on critical race theory, and it's very important because it is a violation of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and its amendments, especially the ones that relate to education in 1972. And it runs counter to the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment. And then it runs counter, I would say, to human decency. In America, we don't shame and bully people because of the color of their skin or some immutable characteristics. And so the focus is on critical race theory, but also taking place in our schools is critical feminist theory, where males, young men, young boys are being shamed because they're male and they're being accused of having toxic masculinity. And so little boys are being encouraged not to be little boys. And males at the university say that in classes they're made to feel like words that I, as a good Southern Christian lady, can't say. But they're being made to feel terrible about who they are, about being a man, and trying to be a gentleman, the way they were raised. That is taking place, and that also is a violation of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 because it banned discrimination on the basis of sex. And of course, it's been applied to women all these years, but it also protects males. And so the Civil Rights Act of 1964, I think many white people, when you say civil rights, they think, oh, it's something for minorities. The Civil Rights Act banned discrimination on the account of race, ethnicity, national origin, and as well as religion and sex. And so it protects white people, it protects males. And there's some other protected groups now, but they are protected by the Civil Rights Act, and part of the remedies, and with my new book, this one, Black Eye for America, we talk about ways that you can combat it. That was my follow-up question on this. And the first thing is, first, there are two chapters on fighting back, and one is on strategies, and one of the strategies is what is taking place now, exercising your voice, standing up, making, your position clear and taking a position, exit, pull your kids out of the school or leave the environment, and then more like insurgency or guerrilla tactics where, you do the Veritas type of hidden camera. You catch them, violating the civil rights law or bullying or intimidating a child. And so you're gathering information, but the way you really defeat it, I think, is first know what it is, where it came from, how it impacts our society, and then use the legal and constitutional means that already exist to fight it. Then organizing grassroots movements to elect school boards, city council members, mayors, and challenging indoctrination efforts like the 1619 Project or whatever it is within their respective domains. And we know with CRT, a lot of times when parents or someone challenges it, they're told, oh, no, we're not doing CRT, we're doing culturally sensitive learning. No, we're doing diversity and equity. No, we're doing educational equity. No, we're doing social justice. But if it is elevating one group above another, if it's demeaning another group, if it involves bullying and shaming, it's CRT. Yeah. And we advocate that you build broad coalitions across racial, ethnic, and partisan lines. This is an American problem. It affects everyone. And so for people to believe that this is a conservative issue or this is a Christian issue, Christians are targeted, though. Religion is involved. Yeah. The Christian religion is the only one that's been singled out and targeted in a way that is meant to shame and bully. Use multiple strategies. And, if you all in media, media is very important. Christian media, is really, is hitting new strides, and that's needed.
100%. Yeah.
But multiple strategies, town hall meetings, writing op-eds, contacting public officials, organizing rallies, just multiple ways of attacking a problem. educating church leaders and encouraging them to lead on racial issues using biblical justice, which is not the same as social justice, standing up to big tech, monitoring state and local governments, federal government, making sure that your tax dollars are not subsidizing it, and it is, and then developing alternatives to DEI. And that's one of the things I've done through my new company, Unity Training Solutions, that's based on the national motto, E pluribus unum, out of many one, and it has training and education that's consistent with our civil rights laws, our Constitution, and just human decency that values individuals and the golden rule to do unto others as we would have them do unto us. And so this last chapter talks about these proposals, goes into detail. This book, this new book, has a glossary, index, appendices with resources, and citations, and it's short.
That's really.
And you brought us copies.
I want to sign too.
Exactly, 100%. And so it seems to me we kind of gotten ourselves in this problem that we're in is because we've kind of been playing with Marxism for a long time. I mean, Toby pointed out earlier, public education is a Marxist play.
It started when the Frankfurt School, fled Germany and took up camp at Columbia University. And from there, they trained, professors and teachers that spread out across the country, taking those ideas. And so, I think it was Lenin that talked about the long march.
Just needed 5% or something.
Long march through the institutions.
Yeah, that's what they've done, and they've been very successful. And as a Christian, we know that in times it's supposed to get worse, and there are people with COVID and mandatory vaccines and. Even with COVID, that seems to be a critical theory, but I haven't come up with what to call it. It's a critical medical theory, critical scientific theory. It's some kind of critical theory because it divides people between the vaccinated and the unvaccinated.
That's a really good point.
And it dehumanizes people that are unvaccinated. It says that they are evil, that they're trying to kill their neighbors, and there are doctors that have said that they will refuse to treat people who become ill that were unvaccinated. And so there's that is playing along the same script, the same Marxist script.
That's a really good point. I haven't thought about it like that.
But I haven't figured out what to call it. I'm still working on that.
Critical medical theory?
That's what I thought.
Something like
critical bat theory.
Wuhan theory?
So we've been...
Wuhan theory?
But it's playing out like a critical theory, and then the suppression of information. And what I see in America is that George Orwell, I believe he was a socialist himself, but he was also a prophet.
He saw it.
Because he has totally gotten it right. And I think we're living in an Orwellian nightmare here in America, and that is part of globalization, the suppression of information, because people who are getting vaccinated and people who are trying to make decisions are not being given complete information. And the government, our government, was willing to let hundreds of thousands of people die rather than take treatments that doctors knew were available. In fact, in California and some states, doctors were told for the first time that they could not prescribe certain drugs. And these were drugs that would save lives.
That happened in Idaho.
Yeah,
our governor signed an executive order against hydroxychloroquine.
For a little while. It got reversed, but there was for a little bit. It seemed like one of the things with Marxism and then even with all these critical theories that makes Christians susceptible to them is that there are these lies that are laced with small truths.
Well, I can tell you there's some Baptist pastors in town. You know who you are, so I'm not going to call you out.
Oh.
It's okay, we don't mind.
Yeah, we don't mind at all.
But, they have done videos where they're evoking the Word of God, and they're really good with that. And they ended with, if you love your neighbor, you have to wear a mask or you have to get vaccinated.
Rick Warren did that on
Yeah.
national TV. Yeah.
No, and they're not, like instead of, in the past, generations ago, when we had smallpox outbreaks and bubonic plague and all of these kind of plagues, because plagues have been around forever. The Christians were the ones that ministered to the sick. And that people, the neighbors saw them ministering to the sick.
They went in.
They believed that God controlled their days. And so they did not live their lives by fear. And all of a sudden, you have all these pastors that are parroting the government agenda. And it reminds me of Nazi Germany, those churches that were silent and that went along with the government. And then they are taking money from the government. Those pastors ought to be ashamed of themselves. And they are not teaching, they're allowing their congregants to live in fear. And there are some churches, I am told, that have not even reopened.
Thank you.
Well, that won't be a bad thing.
Yeah, we're glad for that.
You're right.
Those churches. Well, but I was thinking, like, I mean, I know that's exactly what I'm talking about, but it's like, so, I mean, even back in with Marx, like, he would point at, I mean, his theory was all about economic oppression. Like, the oppression of the upper class and the bourgeoisie against the proletariat, the working class. And then, of course, what the Frankfurt School did and others is they've now shifted that to other classes of people.
Well, Marx, died broke.
Yes, ma'am.
I think 8 people attended his funeral in the late 1800s.
Yeah, he was a
And so
rascal.
his disciples, Antonio Gramsci was one of the ones that came up with what was cultural hegemony.
Yep.
And so they saw that the problem was the culture. That's why economic Marxism failed.
Didn't work,
And they saw Christianity in particular as being a problem. And so they set about changing the culture from within, and they saw the public education, like sex education, that came from one of the Marxists. I can't remember which one it was that developed, sex education in school, but it was to separate the children as much as possible from the teachings of their parents.
That's right.
And what is happening today is a lot of public schools are not giving any homework. They are making the children do it all in school.
They don't want to take it home.
They don't want the parents to see what they're teaching.
Wow.
So I was just looking at your Twitter thread, and you made a comment that I wholeheartedly agree with. It was about 9/11. Someone had asked you if we're ever going to get our freedoms back from 9/11. And you said, basically, you don't get those freedoms back. Once you lose those freedoms, they are gone. And that was one thing I realized with COVID is that 20 years ago, for the sake of staying safe, we gave up liberties that we should have never given up.
Right.
Bad thing happened, yes.
Through a private-public partnership.
Right. And we gave it up those freedoms. Once again, 20 years later, we have COVID come, and for the sake of staying safe, we do the same thing again.
Private-public partnership.
Those
same people involved. It's all about power, and the political left. They've said never let a good crisis go to waste, and so they create crises, and then they use them to gain power, and they never relinquish the power once they have it.
So with that, knowing what you said about that, we're not going to get those liberties back. I think it takes maybe my grandkids might at some point. But
why would they be able to get it back? I mean, it's like
because they're in your book.
No longer exists.
They read your book.
That's
you gave them a play.
I hope that God uses me to be able to cause people to think, and to ponder and to decide. And I don't know how this happened, but I got to do a 2-hour C-SPAN interview on Saturday. It started off kind of like a gotcha, but and I made a comment about it, and then the interviewer shifted. Yeah, but I was able to talk honestly about some of the things I see and I believe. And we're all going to die someday. And a caller asked me, he said he couldn't imagine how much threats I must get and how horrible it must be to be me. And no, I enjoy being me, and I don't live my life in fear. And maybe I'm totally naive, but I just don't live my life in fear. But I know that I will die one day. But God knows the date, the time, the manner, the place of my death. If it's going to be COVID, it's going to be COVID. I don't think it's going to be COVID. Could be violence, but it's already in the books. It's already written.
Amen. Yes, ma'am.
And I will live as long as God wants me to live. And so I believe that is the proper Christian perspective. And if that is the Christian perspective, why would you live your life in fear?
That's right. So,
and the Bible even says in Scripture, whoever thinks he's going to save his life will lose it.
Do you think we're going to get back any of what we've lost with critical race theory?
I think critical race theory, if it reaches court, will fall in 2 years. It's going to take 2 years for it to be declared unconstitutional and for it to get out of our institutions. But you think about it, affirmative action has been around since the mid-1960s, 1970s, and critical race theory is a layer on top of that, more aggressive layer, a layer that even sets us backwards because it's discriminatory, it's resegregating a lot of institutions.
Right.
And we will probably get rid of its most blatant forms, but they will figure out another way to make distinctions because of the power that's involved. And the group that's being hurt the most, I would say, are racial and ethnic minorities. The whole idea that they would make the argument and that the Bill Gates Foundation would fund research that says math is racist and that teachers should not demand, correct math answers from minority students.
Oh, man.
And the assumption is that they're incapable because of this systemic racism of doing math. And just think about the slap in the face of black mathematicians and black architects and scientists. And
you can forget about having another Black Wall Street like that.
Yeah. You can't do math.
Yeah, but they're going along with these things and standard English. And you may remember when the Smithsonian did some type of graph where they said getting to places on time, that was whiteness. Planning for the future,
we talked about that on the show.
And
traditional family is whiteness.
Everything that people
Protestant work ethic.
People like me have done to be successful. They're calling all that whiteness, and so the messages that they are sending to young people are destructive. And as a child, I just longed to see the Smithsonian. I mean, that was my dream. And when I started doing my research on my dissertation, I went to D.C. for the first time, and that was the first place I went. Oh, wow. They have destroyed the Smithsonian. I mean, the Smithsonian is not this educational place that presents history in an accurate kind of way. It has been taken over by the political left. It's all indoctrination. It's all revisionism, and it's part of the decline. And I see America, if God gives us what we deserve, our nation will fall, and it will probably fall to China or one of the Middle Eastern countries, because not only did we turn our back on God, but we have been allowed to do what we want to do, and so we're creating creatures, half human, half animal, allowing them. First they said they can only live for 3 days, now they can live for 2 weeks. And we don't know how many humans that may have been cloned, because there are people that actually, they've been cloning animals since Dolly the sheep. There's so much evil that's taking place in our nation. If God is God, I don't see how he can't hold us accountable.
So here's my bone to pick with conservatives.
Okay.
Is I think conservatives have been pretty good at, maybe analyzing on the surface what's going on. They've been, I think, pretty good to identify what critical race theory is trying to do. But I don't think they don't go back far enough. We've been handing our kids over to public school, so they've been educated by that system for a long time. So we're kind of walking around with one blind eye already because we've been indoctrinated in that process already.
But here's the problem. The Christian schools are doing it too.
100%. I'm with you.
You're not wrong. You're not wrong.
You have to educate your child at home, or you're going to have to hold your Christian schools accountable. And money and dollars talk. And I think that, and I'm finding this happening, that there's some very wealthy, elderly people in their 80s that have been supporting independent schools or various places, and they don't like this critical theory. And in one particular case, a man that's given as much as $6 million to an independent school. If they continue this path, he will withdraw his money. The school will collapse.
Good for him.
And so they have to use tactics like that to be heard.
Yes, you do. So there's a good Christian classical school movement going on nationwide. There's about 300-400 schools part of it. There's a homeschool, classical conversations homeschool movement. and it's real top quality education based in the foundation of the Word of God. But that I'm happy to talk about education, but I think part of the problem, part of where we've already been compromised, is we've allowed evolution in our schools, and it's not critical theory that's the foundation. It's evolution that's the foundation of critical theory, and then into critical race theory.
Because Darwin's theory, it rests on the idea that everything is material and everything is power. It's materialism and power. So if everything is material,
and categories.
There's no God, there's no soul, there's no heaven.
You aren't made.
Then everything's material, and then it's just one step to say, let's classify these material things, into all the, black, male, female, white, whatever it is, rich,
and then who's
poor,
got the most power,
and then who has the most power. It's a very natural consequence that comes straight from Darwin's theory. If there's no creator and we're not made in his image.
Well, I mean, the churches, said or done whatever they're going to do about evolution. And then when young people go to college, if they go to a secular school, if they want to do well on their test, they're going to just give the teacher back what he or she wants. And that may be wise if they're going to be strategically placed in the future. Maybe that's a good way to respond. But I think the Baptists, one of their problems is that they get their teaching materials from Lifeway. And that they would be much better off if they had men and women, Sunday school teachers that were steeped in the Word of God, who developed their own Sunday school lessons rather than go with something that was already packaged.
So they're getting their stuff the same place Ed Litton is getting his for the most part?
Right. They are.
So I might disagree a little bit with you on, you made the comment about being strategically placed in the future. You make your moves, and you might be strategically placed in the future. So maybe don't push back or whatever.
What are you talking about?
You just made the comment earlier that you might want to just kind of answer what the teacher says, because you might be strategically placed somewhere in the future.
Here's what I'm thinking. This is just me thinking.
Yes, ma'am.
I'm not speaking as a great theologian or a perfect Christian. I'm just thinking. For myself, that's not an option because I've always been out in your face. But I have been critical in my life of closet Christians, and now I'm less critical of them because I think we need some. We need some people that no one knows who you are, like the rich man that was a follower of Jesus, and he
Joseph of Arimathea.
They gave up his tomb. He gave him his tomb. They didn't know until he gave his tomb.
It took something radical to happen.
And so I think that we need people that are strategically placed. And so if someone is called, if you're a Christian believer and God has unctioned you to speak, then you should speak. But there are times when you need to be quiet. And I think that for young people, that we shouldn't put too much burden on them, that they should be very strategic. And I've told some young people that you can challenge a professor just by asking a question innocently. I thought, is evolution a theory or is it a fact? Or what about such and such? You do it in such a nice, innocent way, but you don't have to, stand up and do a particular thing. And I can tell you that when God puts someone in my path and they may not be a believer, but they're spiritual. Well, part of my life story is that I was on a journey and I've read lots of materials and studied Eastern religions and New Age and all of that stuff. And people are in different places in their journey. And so I might start talking with someone and I recommend to them The Alchemist. It's a fable written by this Brazilian Christian, because I think that it's deeply spiritual. It has God in it, and that's where they are. And so maybe I'm watering, someone else, or planting, and someone else can water, but I don't tell them you got to read the Bible and receive Jesus today, because I think this is where they were, and I think about myself and my journey, and different people were part of leading me to my conversion, and so that's sort of how I approach things, and I've never been the Four Spiritual Laws type of Christian where we get this little book. I tried it. I found a victim And they agreed to sit down with me, and I went over the book with them, and they heard it, what they were supposed to say, and then, you know, I told them they were saved. That doesn't work for me. But I could get in a conversation with someone and share my testimony, and I feel like that I'm more effective as a believer because I can identify with the journey and the struggle. And I was a sincere seeker, but I didn't get saved until I was in my 40s. I didn't know who Christ was until I was in my 40s. But after I got saved, God took me backwards, and I could see that He was always there. God showed me all the places where He was. And so my journey enables me to talk to people from all kinds of different backgrounds. And so I think in terms of strategy, master strategies, and I see us as being in a war. And I think in a war, the rules of engagement differ.
Which is why, as a Christian, I don't have a problem with deception when we're in a battle. If I'm in a war,
I prefer to call it, I know it means the same thing. I prefer to call it subterfuge, but the meaning is deception, but just a little bit of it.
But the Hebrew midwives, they were in a war, and they lied to Pharaoh and his guards.
They got rewarded for it.
Amen.
Exactly.
You know,
exactly.
So
when you have another example, what you're talking about is Obadiah in the time of Elijah. Elijah's got the megaphone. He's the one telling Ahab, you know, you guys are in trouble for worshiping Baal, and that's why there's this drought for 3 years. But Obadiah is this guy in the king's court, and he's hiding the priests, the prophets of God. 500 in a cave,
and he's bringing the king's food to feed
them.
And
he's working in Ahab's and Jezebel's court. And I'm still scratching my head on how we did that, but I think it makes your point, though. It makes your point that we need people. I think you have to have a line, and you have to know where that line is.
Daniel knew the line.
Exactly.
He served a pagan king.
Exactly. But if you know where the line is, then I think you're right. There are places
you're not going to get it from Sunday school in most places.
That's 100%.
That's exactly right.
100%.
Vacation Bible school is not going to do it.
You can't keep saying, okay, this compromise will be okay, this compromise will be okay. You've got to be willing to know where the line is, and then you say, I will not cross this line. You've got to be willing to lose everything. In that instance, like Daniel and his three friends
and I would also add to that, though, but like the thing that Daniel also did was he also picked fights. So he came into Babylon saying, I'm not going to eat anything but vegetables. Now, there's no Jewish law.
He very nicely decided that whatever they were feeding him, he knew that he couldn't eat it. They may have had bacon and ham.
But he could have had a diet that didn't have to do with vegetables.
Yeah, he could.
Like he could have, but he came in Babylon as a slave and said, "I want, please serve me this." And so he picked a fight that I think, and I think the point there with what Daniel was doing was he was doing something, and he was picking a fight in such a way that he knew God would be victorious in that. And what happens is when we go to when our kids go to college, or I went to University of Idaho. I went to actually 3 colleges and finished at University of Idaho, And one of the things I learned in that process was to pick the right fights. And it's always, I'm always encouraging people to do it with their gifts and their abilities.
Well, wait a minute. If we believe that the Holy Spirit indwells the believer and God is leading us and directing us, then why wouldn't we believe that some of the decisions that we think we're making, that God is actually steering those decisions? And so I think that some of those things that we're doing and we're thinking we're making those choices, we're not really making those choices.
God's sovereign over it all.
As much as we think we are.
Yeah, God's
sovereign over it all. And so we're trying to do the best with what we can see as Christians, but standing on the Word of God.
Right.
And we're trying to make the best moves that we can see in front of us.
Right.
And so when we're having this conversation, when I have this conversation with college students, I'm saying, you're leaning in with your gifts and your abilities. I don't expect you to do what I did, because you got different gifts than I do. But I do want you to think like a Christian at wherever classroom you're at,
right?
And how to lean into it.
Well, here's another issue that I experienced with Christian students. If they were applying, particularly to medical school, there were interviews, and they may be asked questions about abortion or various issues like that.
Ooh.
And that would be a concern. And I felt that was one of those areas where they had to be very strategic, very careful. Maybe one or two was called to give a Christian witness and not get into the school, or maybe they would get in. But I think that in situations like that, subterfuge, it depends on how they do it. But I think that
here's
you want people placed in positions.
I would be more leaning that way if 2020 racked up a little different. If we had pastors at that point to hold their ground and say, God has given me this authority, the federal government or the local entities don't get to shut us down. Because I think there are a group of Christians out there that use that excuse as points not to engage at all.
Oh, I know that, and I know some pastors that blow with the wind, whichever political parties
like you were talking about earlier.
Yeah, they go with that, and that's problematic.
But watching, and here's what, like John MacArthur has been training pastors for 40, 50 years?
A long time.
For a long time. You think about 40 years of pastor training, going out planting churches in America. When it came time for him to stand up, and they did, there wasn't a whole lot of wind in their sails.
He
from
didn't
the church.
disciple the pastors that well.
It was. They didn't have a whole lot of folks standing with them. It was crickets.
No, it was fear, so much fear.
Yep.
And that's right.
Death thing, and it's just so much manipulation that's been involved with the way COVID has been handled.
Yep.
And I think that that COVID-19 and how it's been handled by the government is a dress rehearsal for the mark of the beast. And the government knows exactly what they can do, because people are just going to line up, and the ones that don't line up, they're going to treat them the way they treat the unvaccinated.
But
maybe worse.
Yeah.
You got a godly man like that.
Like who?
John MacArthur.
Yeah.
He's been faithful over these years, and he stands up, and you've been trained underneath that kind of godliness. I think you haven't had faculties of being faithful when practice that weapon.
And that's the challenge, is like, in order to stand
they want to
strong,
seem smart, and they want to be loved, and
right?
They
But frequently, what they'll do though is then, in the name of seeming smart, not getting canceled, they say, "I'm practicing subterfuge."
I hope they're not saying that.
But that's what they are. Actually.
But because I think there's a difference. I know what you're talking about. You're talking about picking your battles strategically while still knowing whose team you're on.
No, but I mean with the churches, I don't think the churches should have shut down.
Oh yeah, no, I agree 100%. Completely, 100%.
Because you believe God controls life and death, and it's already foreordained when, how, the place of when someone's going to die. Then you wouldn't be assuming, that the person can control it by wearing a mask or whatever the government is saying.
That was fantastic. Oh, that was so good.
You like that taco salad?
Yeah, it was actually really good.
I got to ask you before we go.
Yeah.
So, have you seen I think it was a little bit ago, there's two questions. One of them is, are the Southern Baptists going to make it? Because I'm really concerned about, I think the Southern Baptist Convention is one of the last standing pillars of...
It was.
She just answered the question.
Is America going to make it? Because it's not the country that I recognize from my childhood.
Yeah. Wow.
Okay, so that's a quick answer. The other one was, what do you...
Here's what's the problem with the Southern Baptists. Is that they don't believe the gospel of Jesus Christ. Some of the pastors.
Mic drop.
Bam. They really don't. Here's why. Because they're so ashamed of how they were founded. And they can't forgive themselves or receive Christ's forgiveness.
For that.
Because they have confessed it. I've lost track of how many times the Southern Baptists, I'm just talking about the convention, not just the individual pastors, have confessed, the
racism
sin of racism and slavery and all that. And
every year they're back at it again, aren't they?
And
the Presbyterian Church has done that too.
Yeah, the Presbyterians are doing it too.
And here's the thing too, is that the civil rights activists have no incentive to let them off the hook because it's too lucrative.
Keep working.
And they're getting money from like Southern Baptists. It's no telling how much. In fact, I was told that 150 churches that showed up at the convention to vote on the resolution, that they had their expenses paid.
Yes.
to be there.
Yes, some were getting bussed in from entity
So they got
groups.
vacations. They got vacations in Nashville. That's a popular vacation destination.
Wow.
And they're being part of a shakedown because of that guilt. And instead of them talking about forgiveness and as far as racial reconciliation, one side can't reconcile. It takes two sides coming together to reconcile.
But now you're doing math again.
I'm not good at math, but I know that one side can't do it all.
Yes, ma'am.
And to say that one side, is so superior that they control the fate of the other side, that's racism itself.
Yes, ma'am.
And so there's a lot of pandering that takes place. And with the Southern Baptist Convention, until they actually start preaching the Word of God, what God says about race, and responsibility and forgiveness. Like, how many times does the Bible talk about forgiveness? And so the pastors might have one or two blacks in some of their congregations that may have a chip on their shoulders, and they're allowing those people to dictate, for everyone else. And I think that is a problem. And I don't believe that the church is racist, and that's why Sunday is supposed to be the most segregated day. I think that a lot of black people don't like what they see as white music.
That's true.
And there are other denominations where they don't like. I go to my Baptist church. I can be sure that I'm going to be out maybe in an hour, but maybe a little bit over. But I'm not going to be there 2 hours. I go to my Pentecostal church, and I might be there 3 hours.
In the Baptist church, they follow that bulletin.
Yeah, they do. And so, I think people make choices based on what they want and what they have planned. And so
That's good.
I just wish people would exercise more common sense on these issues.
Well, we don't have a lot of that, which is why this one is going to be interesting. I just want to hear you talk about Larry Elder being the new face of white supremacy. I just would love to hear you.
Well, as usual, I'm always a path breaker. So in 2009, I had two things happen. One is I wrote an opinion piece that summer. At that time, I was writing for the Huffington Post.
What?
And it was Mission Creek about the Southern Poverty Law Center. So I criticized them. And I said, instead of monitoring hate groups, the Southern Poverty Law Center has become one. I think that was my last line. That was in the summer. Well, probably September, October, the Tennessean did an article on me that was inspired by a phone call from the Southern Poverty Law Center, and it called me an apologist for white supremacy, because I had reviewed a film. The film was a conversation about race that had been put together by a white filmmaker who they said was a racist. And part of why they said it was a racist, that he had gotten into an online fight with someone about Obama. And maybe he called Obama a monkey or something like, somewhere a monkey or something like that got said. But I kind of liked the film because I had gotten tired of just showing the eyes on the prize when I did civil rights courses. So they would have all these films about race, but they would always be the same film, pretty much. So I wanted to show a film that told it from the perspective of white people. And this guy was very clever. He just stuck a microphone in front of people's faces, and I can sympathize with the people, and he asked them to define racism. And most people on the spot, they can't define something in a very clear way, but they said it was everywhere and all the time. And white people, he interviewed whites, blacks, Asians, all kinds of people, well-educated people, and they all said racism was everywhere. And then he said, well, can you give me some examples? Well, then they were really stumped. And then with some of the blacks, there was a person that said, well, I went to a department store and the clerk said, may I help you? And maybe there was something about the way that the clerk said that she thought it was racist, but when you actually say that on camera,
it doesn't play very well.
And then there was a black man said that he dated white women, and that everywhere he went, that he knew that people were looking at him out of the corner of his eyes. And so all the examples that they used were examples, and it was everyone, whites and blacks speaking, that they kind of fell flat. And then this man kind of ends with, a animated part of it where he's a child in the classroom, and there's an Asian teacher and a white teacher, and they put two words, black and white, on the board. They ask the kids what comes to mind, and so the kids, are trying to cooperate and say what comes to mind. And then one of the teachers turns and say, "You're a racist, you're all this." And so supposedly he was so traumatized because of it. And he said that racism was something that minorities used pretty much, that it didn't exist and was used to beat up white people. Well, I thought it'd be great for classroom use. So I gave it an overly enthusiastic endorsement. And that's why the Southern Poverty Law Center labeled me as an apologist for white supremacy. And I was attacked. All the big radio shows were talking about me, but no one, I'm talking the ones with the black hosts, they would not have me on. And I was just I did not have the platform. This is 2009, did not have the platform that I have today. And James Taranto with the Wall Street Journal, he was the editor of the Wall Street Journal Online. He did a 2,000-word article in defense of Carol Swain. And it kind of backfired against the Southern Poverty Law Center because, after all, I was the author of The New White Nationalism in America. It's challenged integration. And just with my record and who I am and stuff like that, it helped show that the Southern Poverty Law Center had no credibility.
Wow. Do you think that's what's going to happen with Larry Elder and the LA Times opinion piece on him?
They called Candace Owens a white supremacist, and they have redefined what it is to be a white supremacist. Yeah. When I was doing my research for the book that was published in 2002, a white supremacist was a white person who thought because of their race and ethnicity that they were superior to other groups, that the white race was supreme.
Right.
Now, all white people are considered white supremacists. Right. And so blacks that, that will speak out against discrimination against whites are considered a white supremacist, and maybe even anyone that's not buying the leftist agenda, the progressive agenda, is labeled as a white supremacist. But I think that the average American knows that this is foolishness and this is nonsense and this is ridiculous. So I don't think it will affect Larry Elder. Yeah. And it's very dangerous to ask me a question because I answer it like a girl.
I don't know what that means.
I don't know.
It means that I just go...
Elaborate on it?
I talk long enough I forget the question.
No,
that's good. That's good.
With Elder, what's interesting about this for me is that it seems like they have to find a way to expand. I read another article from CNN that the American census came out, the last one that they took last year, that the white population is declining, and now people of color becoming the new minority.
But when I wrote The New White Nationalism in America, we already knew that.
Right,
we
exactly.
knew that was going to happen by 2047.
Yeah. And
it may happen sooner because the census asks, what race do you consider yourself? Well, a lot of people consider themselves anything they want. Yep. And so the white category is overinflated.
Right. But with that happening, the narrative of white supremacy with white people being a minority, white supremacy will have to be a minority too. And so with that changing, they have to give white supremacy to a majority in order to keep those things intact, right? So now we have to have other people that are not white perpetuate white supremacy as
and
identity.
they consider Asians white. Right. And so, and when they're talking about hate crimes against Asians, they're not saying who's committing those hate crimes.
I've seen those, it doesn't follow.
I got a question. Can you sign my book?
I'll be happy to sign it. I enjoyed it, by the way.
Good. We enjoyed it.
American colleges have become more hostile to the faith of young Christians than the beaches of Normandy were to the Allies. Literally.
Undergraduate training wasn't always a death trap of unbelief. Once colleges were boot camps for body, mind, and soul.
Now, most college students spend their days in tax-funded adult daycares with all the intellectual rigor of lazy rivers, safe spaces, and complimentary condoms.
And in our recent COVID faux-apocalypse, those daycares became prisons almost overnight. Cover your face, line up for your shot, stay in your room, but don't worry, the condoms were still complimentary. At New St. Andrews, you are not on vacation, you are not in daycare, and you won't be herded into a dorm. From week one, you'll be treated like an adult.
You're responsible for paying your own rent and developing your own grocery budget. Or going hungry. Get a shot, or don't. Mask up, or don't. Most of our students even work part-time jobs on top of the 40-hour class workload. It's part of the anti-fragile hustle and grind that distinguishes our graduates from the majority of their own generation, and that employers and graduate schools love.
Most college graduates in the U.S. are stuck paying off loans for years. New St. Andrews sets you up to graduate debt-free and dangerous, ready to pursue grad school, a family, or business opportunities in the real world without any reliance on pork subsidies from Mother America and with no weepy need for safe spaces. The real world isn't a cushy place. No one owes you success. You are entitled to exactly jack squat in this life. But rich or poor, unlike your face or your freedom, your job or your business, an education and the ability to think clearly can never be taken from you as long as you are still above ground. Not by petty tyrants or cowardly clergy, not by thoughtless mobs or lab coat megalomaniacs. At New St. Andrews College, you'll learn from teachers whose ideas equipped men and women to build Western civilization in the first place, and which will be used again to defend and rebuild what has been lost as the West has faltered into decay, losing her faith and her mind.
Yes, most of our best teachers are dead. But our classical Christian liberal arts education is how we've been graduating thoughtful, articulate outlaws and leaders with spines for the last quarter century. The intellectual and theological bedrock beneath a Judeo-Christian West is what you'll study, engage with, write about, and own. It is what you will debate in class and present in public as you learn to live like forbidden fire, surrounded by the darkness of unbelief, manifesting God's truth, goodness, and beauty to all who live around you.
Training like this can't happen over Zoom. At New St. Andrews, we believe whoever walks with the wise becomes wise, but a companion of real or virtual fools will suffer harm. Your peers shouldn't be your spiritual leaders. You should have a real, flesh and blood, in-person church for that.
NSA is in the heart of downtown Moscow, Idaho, where you will witness men and women building Christendom on every corner. Where else are you going to be able to break bread in your professors' homes, debate great literature with them while their kids are playing, sing psalms while being arrested with them, catch turtles with them?
No one comes to NSA to get lost in the crowd. You might be able to hide in a graduating class of thousands, but our classes are better measured in dozens. You will grow in this program or you will tap out. And when you finish, you'll be ready for life, in whatever moments and scenes and struggles God may have prepared for you. We are training students who worship and march and study and fellowship and sing and write and start businesses and raise kids that no one can mask, cancel, or bury. We follow the King of Kings who knew the way through the mob and out of the grave. We fight to rebuild Christendom in the ruins, in our families, and in our businesses, in the cities where we live, in the countries where we go, in the congregations where we worship. Your mom may worry that Moscow, Idaho is many miles from home. She should worry more about how spiritually distant even a nearby godless campus is.
After 4 years in a Christian community like ours, you will grow much closer to your family. Don't stay distant. Click the link today to schedule a visit to New St. Andrews College.